Hello everyone! The topic for this lecture is public key cryptography, also known as asymmetric cryptography. In the previous lectures we have looked at symmetric or secret key cryptography, where both parties had to share a secret key, which could then be used for encryption or integrity protection. Now the challenge with symmetric cryptography is that it requires a confidential channel over which we and the other party can agree on a common secret key that will be used to protect our future communication. But the question is, where can we get such a confidential channel in real life? Probably we could meet in some quiet corner and exchange the key there. But what if we are far away from each other? Would it be secure to, let's say, tell the secret key over the phone or send it over email? It turns out that in practice it is not easy to get access to such a confidential channel. In fact, one could say that if we had such a channel easily available, we could use it to exchange our messages without the need to apply any encryption in the first place. So the reason why the invention of public key cryptography was such a big deal in the late 70s is that it introduced a way to exchange a secret key over a non-confidential channel as long as this channel provided authenticity. For example, using public key cryptography, we can establish a common secret key over the phone even if someone eavesdrops on our conversation. The only requirement is that we must be able to authenticate the other party, for example, by the person's voice if it is familiar to us, because we don't want to exchange the secret key with an attacker, but the authentic other party. So you see, public key cryptography simplified our problem because it is much easier to ensure that our channel provides authenticity than to ensure that it provides authenticity and is confidential. Right? Right. The second great benefit of public key cryptography is that it enables digital signatures. A signatory uses their private key to create a digital signature, and everyone using the public key can verify that the signature could have been created only by someone who had the corresponding private key. We will see later. But to summarize, the main benefits of asymmetric cryptography are as follows. The first is that using asymmetric cryptography, a secret key can be negotiated over a non-confidential channel. But the requirement is that this channel has to provide authenticity for the exchange messages, because otherwise, if the attacker can manipulate messages sent over this channel, then we may end up establishing a secure channel, not with the party we want, but with the attacker. And this is a very crucial point, so please remember. And the second benefit is that asymmetric cryptography provides the possibility for digital signatures. That is, provides data origin authentication. So if there is just one thing you will remember from this lecture, please remember these two main points that summarize the main benefits provided by public key cryptography. Now, let's see how public key cryptography works by looking at the RSA algorithm as an example. So the focus of this lecture is the RSA algorithm, which was invented in 1977 by these three gentlemen. So RSA stands for Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman. This is the most popular public key crypto system, and the good thing about RSA is that it is relatively simple. So let's look at how it works. So the RSA algorithm. Again, whenever we are talking about some crypto system, we have to describe how to generate the keys, how to encrypt, and how to decrypt. So the key generation for RSA is as follows. First, we have to choose two distinct prime numbers, P and Q. If you recall, a prime number is a number that can be divided only by 1 and itself. The prime numbers in RSA have to be very large to provide sufficient security. Usually, the primes are at least 1024 bits long, but we can generate such numbers easily. We can take some random 1024-bit number and then apply some primality testing algorithms, which will tell us with very high confidence whether the number is prime or not. If it is not, we choose another number until we find one which is prime. And we do the same for both P and Q. Then we have to compute the so-called modulus n, which is simply a multiplication of these two primes. And as a rule, if we multiply two 1024-bit numbers, we will get a 2048-bit number. So when multiplying, the bit lengths of the multipliers add up. So in RSA, if we say that this is a 2048-bit RSA key, by 2048 we actually refer to the size of the modulus. The primes p and q will be half of the bit length. Okay? Then we have to compute the so-called phi of modulus. Simple math, p minus 1 multiplied by q minus 1. In the next step, we have to choose an integer e such that e and phi n are coprime, or relative prime. It means that they don't have common divisors other than 1. There is a simple GCD, greatest common divisor algorithm, which can be used to check whether they are coprime. If they're not, we pick another e until we find one that is coprime to phi n. And we can choose the value of e from the range 1 to phi n. Then, after we have picked e, we find an integer d such that d multiplied by e and divided by phi n will have the remainder 1. Again, there are algorithms to calculate it easily. And that is it. We have generated the key. N is the modulus, E is the public exponent or encryption exponent, and D is the private exponent or decryption exponent. So the public key consists of the modulus N and the public exponent E, while the private key is exponent D. So this number D is our private key, which we must not tell to anyone. As you see, after the key generation, we can throw away the primes P and Q. We need only D for decryption. In fact, if needed, we can always recover the primes P and Q if we know the private exponent D. And vice versa, we can calculate D if we know the primes P and Q and the public exponent E. Now, how do we encrypt? If key generation perhaps was not too trivial, then encryption and decryption in RSA is super simple. To encrypt, we take the message M and take it to the power of E, encryption exponent, modulo N. This will produce some integer C, our ciphertext. So the modulo operation here means that C will be the remainder after we divide M to the power of E by N. To decrypt, we take the ciphertext to the power of D, decryption exponent, modulo N, and we will get back the message M. So you see, the property here is that M to the power of E to the power of D will recover the original message M. So why it works? It works because of some magic math. If you want to understand, you have to study number theory, which we will not do here. But the point you have to remember here is that anyone can take some message, take it to the public exponent E, but only we, who have the corresponding private exponent D, will be able to recover the message M. So anyone can encrypt for us, but only we, who have the corresponding private key, will be able to decrypt it. What you should note here is that the message should not be bigger than the modulus N. Otherwise, it will be the reduced modulo N. So the size of the message we can encrypt is limited by the size of the modulus. Now, the security of this RSA algorithm relies primarily on the difficulty of the so-called integer factorization problem. If we could factor this public key modulus N, then we could recover the private key. But even though we know the value of N, and we know that it is the multiplication of two primes, there is no efficient way to recover these primes. Sure, we can try dividing N by all possible prime numbers until we find one which divides N. But if N is large enough, there are too many primes to try, even if we spend all our lifetime on that. Okay? Okay. Now, when implementing this so-called modular exponentiation in Python, we can use this naive approach. Take M to the power of E and then calculate remainder of the division by N. If we use this naive approach, the calculation here would take forever. A much faster approach is using the special built-in function POW, M to the power of E modulo N. So what is the difference? The problem with this naive approach is that it will first calculate the result of this exponentiation, which will be a super big number, and then we'll try to divide it by N. POW will do it more efficiently. it turns out that we can reduce the result modulo n after each multiplication, such that this exponentiation result never grows too big. The end result will be the same in both cases, just that the POW function will do it much more efficiently. Okay? All right. So the idea behind RSA encryption and the RSA algorithm in general can be explained in very simple terms. What is encrypted with the public key can be decrypted only with the private key, and vice versa. What is encrypted with the private key can be decrypted only with the public key. So why is encryption used? The security objective here is that only the recipient should be able to decrypt, right? How do we encrypt? What do we need to encrypt something for the recipient? We need the public key of the recipient. So we encrypt using the public key of the recipient. Now, how will the recipient decrypt? Using their private key, right? Right. Now, what is commonly overlooked is the fact that to encrypt something for the recipient, we do not need to generate a key pair. We just need the public key of the recipient. Only if we ourselves want to receive some RSA encrypted message, only then we have to generate a key pair and publish the public key. Very good. Now, the problem is that usually we want to encrypt data that is larger than the modulo size. So the question is, how can we encrypt plaintext larger than the modulo size? What if we want to encrypt using RSA, let's say, a 1 gigabyte of data? The first idea is that we could increase the modulo size by generating a larger key. But the problem is that if we double the modulo size, we get slowed down by a factor of 8. So the slowdown is nonlinear, it is exponential. So this is not an option. Then we could split data into blocks and decrypt them separately. It would work fine. However, the problem is that exponentiation is a much slower operation than bitwise operations, XORing and bit shifting used by symmetric ciphers. So as a rule, asymmetric encryption is much slower than symmetric. So for performance reasons, we want to avoid using asymmetric cryptography as much as possible. The solution is to use the so-called hybrid encryption, where we use RSA to encrypt a random symmetric data encryption key, while the data itself will be encrypted with the symmetric encryption key, also known as a transport key. And here is an illustration. The recipient will first use their RSA private key to decrypt the symmetric transport key, and then use the transport key to decrypt the actual data encrypted using a fast symmetric encryption scheme. Usually, when RSA is used for encryption, we will not see plain text directly encrypted using RSA. We will see this type of hybrid encryption scheme where RSA is only used to encrypt a symmetric transport key. And this is also how a secure, encrypted, and authenticated channel can be established with the recipient. We can take some secret symmetric key, encrypt it for the recipient using RSA. The recipient will be able to decrypt it, and we both now will have a shared secret that can be used to exchange confidential messages using the symmetric encryption schemes we have discussed in the previous lectures. We will discuss this in more detail after a few lectures when discussing the TLS protocol. Now, once we understand encryption and decryption in RSA, it is very straightforward to understand how signing works in RSA. The concept of signing in RSA is super simple. We just reverse the keys. So signing is encryption with the private key and decryption with the public key. We encrypt with our private key, and everyone else who has the public key can recover the message we have encrypted, and they can be sure that only the one who had the corresponding private key, that is us, could have encrypted or signed the message. So why is signing used? The signing is used so that everyone could authenticate the origin of the message. How do we sign some data? We simply encrypt it with our private key. How will others verify? By decrypting with our public key and seeing what value or statement we have signed. In practice, a message digest or hash of the data is encrypted or signed. Why? Because if we want to sign 1 gigabyte of data, we don't want to encrypt all of it. We can simply calculate a 32-byte hash of the data and sign this small hash value. Since the hash value uniquely identifies this 1 gigabyte of data, by signing the hash, we indirectly sign the value which corresponds to that hash. Quite smart, right? Now let's talk a bit about exponentiation. The exponentiation is a cryptographer's second favorite operation after the XOR operation. So a question to you. Which operation is harder to calculate? X to the power of this number or x to the power of this number? Well, since I'm asking this, the correct answer is not the one which seems intuitive. One would think that exponentiation to this larger number is more complex than exponentiation to this smaller number. Surprisingly, this is not true. If we use the naive exponentiation algorithm, which simply multiplies x with itself, then for sure, calculating this would require more operations than calculating this. However, there is a more efficient exponentiation algorithm called square and multiply, or exponentiation by squaring. It turns out that the number of multiplications that have to be performed using this algorithm is the number of bits in the exponent plus number of ones or non-zero bits in the exponent. If we now look at the binary representation of these exponents, we can see that even though this number has less bits, it has more zeros here, and therefore overall requires more multiplications than this bigger number here. It is perhaps hard to see, but let me show this in a simple example. X to the power of 8 versus x to the power of 7. As you see, x to the power of 8 requires only 3 multiplications, while x to the power of 7 requires 4. So it depends on how much we can reuse the intermediate multiplications already calculated. Here, first we square x, then we square the result of it, and then we square the result of it once more. So 3 multiplications in total. In the case of power to the 7, we cannot optimize it like this. Yes, we can square x, then we can square the result, but that's it. We cannot replace these 2 multiplications with one squaring as we could here, right? So I hope you got the idea. Now, what this all means in the context of RSA is that perhaps we could pick RSA exponents to be in a special form such that RSA operations are faster. So in case of RSA exponents, the question is, can we choose public and private exponents E and D such that they provide faster encryption and decryption? As we can see from the key generation process, we cannot really choose both exponents. We can fix only one exponent, the other is determined by the first and will be a random value in the size of phi n, which is close to the size of the RSA modulus. So first, can we choose the public exponent E such that it provides faster encryption? Yes, we can. Today, all RSA key generation algorithms use the value 65537 as the public exponent because it provides much faster encryption. Here you can see the binary representation of it, and as you see, most of the bits are zeros here. E equals 3 may also be used. This will provide even faster encryption, but there are some use cases where it provides weaker security, therefore using it is not recommended. Very good, so we can speed up the public key operations, encryption and signature verification. This is good for the parties who want to send us encrypted data or to verify our signatures, but it does not help us to perform decryption and signing faster, right? So can we instead choose the private exponent D such that it will provide faster private key operations, faster decryption and signing? The answer is strong no, because this will leak information about the secret D. The value D must be completely random. If an attacker knew that we had D in a form that provides faster decryption, it means that D is not random, and the attacker would have a good chance to guess it. Even more, constant time exponentiation must be used when applying D. We cannot use the optimized square and multiply algorithm discussed on the previous slide. If we used it, an attacker could measure how long the decryption takes and could deduce how many zeros and ones are in our private exponent, right? And that would be very bad. So again, whenever we have to calculate something based on secret data, we have to use constant time operations. But alright, enough about exponents. Let's look at the RSA private key file format. In this course, we will not generate RSA key pair ourselves, but we will use the OpenSSL tool to do that. So we can run the OpenSSL tool, passing the gen PK parameter, specifying algorithm RSA, then where to write the private key, and the RSA modulus size 2048. The primes will be half that length. It will generate the primes. Here we can see that it goes over candidate primes for P and Q, and by default, it uses the fixed standard public key exponent 65537. If we look at the created file, we can see this output. As you see, there is some base64 encoded data and the header and footer, which describes what this encoded data contains. So if we take this base64 encoded data and decode it, we will obtain an ASN1 dir encoded structure. So this is the so-called PEM format, which is basically a base64 encoded ASN1 dir structure. PEM is easier to work with because text is easier to copy and paste compared to binary data. To obtain the dir data, we can either take this base64 encoded data and decode it by hand, or we can use OpenSSL PKCS8 utility to convert it, and the dir structure will be written into priv.dir file. By default, OpenSSL will try to encrypt the private key using a password, but we can skip that by passing the no encrypt option parameter here. If we dump ASN1 in the file, we can see a sequence with many integer fields. This one we can recognize. This is the public exponent. This first one is the modulus. This is the private exponent D, then primes P and Q, and other values. Here is the ASN1 notation of this private key structure. This structure is called private key info, and it contains also the object identifier identifying the public key algorithm to which this private key corresponds. As you see, the private key structure does not contain just the private key, which would be this private exponent here, but the whole key pair. Using the OpenSSL utility, we can extract from this private key file only the public part, which we can then share with others. We can use this command to get a dir encoded public key file, and this one if we want the PEM encoded version. If we dump ASN1 this public key file, we can see the following structure. This structure is called subject public key info because it contains not only the public key, but also the object identifier identifying the public key algorithm to which this public key corresponds. As you see, here the public key itself is encoded as a bit string. The bit string encapsulates an ASN1 dir encoded sequence consisting of the RSA modulus here and the public exponent. This means that the decoder has to first extract this bitstring value and then pass it to the decoder once more to decode the RSA public key structure. The bitstring data type is probably used because this public key file format is universal, not only meant for RSA keys. There can be some crypto system where the public key is just a bitstring, for example. Here is the ASN1 notation of subject public key info structure defined in these RFC standards. Before discussing other topics of this lecture, let's discuss the homework task, which is to implement an RSA encryption and signing utility. So there are 4 possible modes in which it can be run: encrypt, decrypt, sign, and verify. The utility must support private and public keys in PEM and dir formats. The file format should be detected by content. If the file starts with a PEM header, remove the header and footer and decode the base64 data. If it does not start with a PEM header, you can assume that the contents are already in dir format. Then the utility should halt with some meaningful error message if requested to encrypt or sign plain text larger than possible due to the size of the modulus. Okay? In signing mode, the tool must sign the SHA-256 hash, digest info structure, of the file to be signed. Signature verification must output verified OK or verification failure. See the test case in a few slides for the precise output your tool must print. Encryption and signing must be done according to PKCS 1 version 1.5 standard, which I will explain on the next slide. For ASN1 dir encoding, use your own encoder and use PySN1 for decoding. Now about this PKCS 1 version 1.5 standard. As you saw before, the encryption in RSA is simply taking the message to the power of the public exponent. However, in practice, we have to apply padding in the encryption process, as otherwise the RSA scheme is not secure. And here's how we do it. So the instructions for the homework. The encryption process looks as follows. First, we have to pad the plaintext, and here is how we have to apply the padding. The value of these 3 bytes is fixed. D here is the original plaintext we want to encrypt. PS here is a padding string. The requirement is that it has to be at least 8 random bytes, and these bytes must not contain a 0 byte. And plaintext must be padded to the size of the modulus n. As you see, the most significant byte here is 0, which guarantees that when converted to an integer, this padded plaintext will still be smaller than the modulus, so there will be no problem with recovering the original message. Now, this requirement of random padding is crucial for security. What do you think? Why is it crucial for the security of RSA encryption to have at least 8 random bytes in the padding? What if we used fixed padding here? Would this create a security issue? Well, the problem is that RSA on its own is deterministic. If we encrypt the same message with the same key, we will get the same ciphertext. If an attacker sees 2 RSA ciphertexts which are the same, the attacker can conclude that they contain the same plaintext, similarly as it was for block ciphers. The security risk here is even bigger because the attacker can verify the guesses of D here. Since the public key is public, anyone can try encrypting different D values until a matching ciphertext is found. In symmetric encryption, this could not be done because in symmetric encryption, the encryption key is secret, right? But here it is public, and therefore anyone can brute force the plaintext. Since here we have this random padding, the attacker would also have to brute force this padding string, which is 8 bytes. But this would require performing 2 to the 64 operations, which is infeasible. So this means that the padding provides at least 64 bits of security against plaintext guessing attacks, or even more if the original plaintext is shorter and hence the random padding is longer. Alright, after the plaintext has been padded, we have to convert padded byte string to integer. Then we calculate the ciphertext using the Python's POW function and the public exponent e. Finally, we convert the ciphertext integer back to byte string and write it to a file. Decryption process. Convert ciphertext to integer, calculate decryption using the same POW function but using the private exponent. The warning here is that Python's POW implementation is not constant time, so the information about the private exponent will leak through timing. So think carefully whether to use this code in production systems. Then we convert the encrypted integer to byte string and remove padding. So how to remove padding? What we do is that we start from the second byte and search for the first occurrence of 0 byte. After that 0 byte, the padded plaintext follows. This is the reason why it is forbidden for the padding string to contain 0 bytes, as the 0 byte is the padding separator here. The PKCS 1 version 1.5 scheme is described in this RFC here, in case you're interested. The signing process is very similar, just a few differences. We start by constructing the plaintext. The plaintext that we will sign is their digest info of the file we want to sign. We pad the plaintext. The difference is this byte here. It has value 1 for signing, but value 2 for encryption, as you saw on the previous slide. D is our plaintext to sign, that is their encoded digest info structure. PS is our padding string, 8 or more bytes with value 255. So here for signing, the padding is fixed and the minimum length of the padding does not serve any security purpose. And next, plaintext must be padded to the size of the modulus n. Then we convert the padded byte string to an integer, calculate the signature using the private exponent d, convert the signature integer to a byte string, and here it is important to make sure that the signature is encoded to the same byte length as the modulus. So in case your signature integer here results in 0, your signature file should not be an empty file, but there should be 0 bytes, the same length as the modulus. Okay? The verification process. Convert signature byte string to integer, calculate decryption of signature value using the public exponent t, convert decrypted integer to byte string, remove padding to obtain their digest info structure, and compare the decrypted digest info with the digest info of the signed file we want to verify. If they match, return OK, otherwise return failure. Note that for security reasons, the digest info structures have to be compared and not just hashes. This is required to make sure that the same hash function is used and that digest info is correctly formed. Okay? And here is the link to the RFC. Test cases. First, we generate an RSA key and export the public key. Here we are using 2041-bit RSA key to test whether the length of the ciphertext is correctly handled. To test encryption, we write hello to some plaintext file, then encrypt it using the public key, and then use OpenSSL PKUtil to decrypt it. Then we check if there are no differences between the original plaintext and the recovered plaintext, and there should not be any. To test decryption, we use OpenSSL PKUtil to encrypt plaintext, and our RSA tool to decrypt what has been encrypted using OpenSSL. Again, the original and decrypted plaintext should match. To test signing, create a 1 MB file full of random bytes, sign it with our RSA tool, and verify with OpenSSL Digest tool. To test successful verification, sign using OpenSSL and verify using our RSA tool. It should show verified OK. To test failed verification, sign using OpenSSL with a wrong hash algorithm. Verification with our RSA tool should return verification failure. Okay? A note about debugging. In case OpenSSL is not able to decrypt your ciphertext or verify your signature, you can use OpenSSL PKUtil to see how the result of decryption with the private or public key looks. This RSA padding mode none parameter will show raw decryption without trying to parse and remove your potentially incorrect padding. In case padding is correctly applied, you should see something like this when decrypting ciphertext with the private key. So here is the message, hello here, the 0 byte separating the padding from the message, the random non-zero padding, and the padding prefix, these 2 bytes here. When raw decrypting the signature with the public key, you should see something like this. Here starts our digest info structure, where these final 32 bytes contain SHA-256 digest. Here is the 0 byte separator, fixed signature padding with FF bytes, and these 2 bytes, the padding prefix. If the result you get here or here is completely random, then the problem is not in the padding, but most likely you are using the wrong key. Make sure that you apply the correct modulus and exponent when performing modular exponentiation. Okay? So I hope it is clear about the homework. Now, there are a couple of additional topics we have to discuss in this lecture. First, let's discuss the key length recommendations. Here is a table of key length recommendations provided by NIST. Today, we are targeting this security level, which is believed to provide security after year 2030. So, to preserve security after 2030, we should use a security level of at least 128 bits. This means that we should use AES 128 because it provides 128-bit security. However, to get the same security level for RSA, we have to use an RSA key with a modulus size of 3072 bits. Now, why is it so? Why does 3072-bit RSA not have a 3072-bit security level? Well, the answer is because such an RSA key can be brute forced in less than 2 to the 3000 operations. First of all, there are 2 primes, and an attacker has to guess only 1, which is half of this size. Then, not every number is a prime number, so the attacker in the brute force process can skip non-primes, and there are many more optimizations for factoring numbers. The current state-of-the-art knowledge allows us to say that to factor a 3072-bit modulus, one would have to perform around 2 to the 128 operations. For signing files, we should use SHA-256, which provides 128-bit security level for collision resistance. For HMAC and key derivation, where we need only the second parameter resistance, even the broken SHA-1 will provide us a 128-bit security level. A note about this table is that when you design a security system, you should try to compose the system using primitives with equivalent security level. It does not make sense to choose some primitives with a lower security level and others with a higher security level, because the overall security of the system will usually be limited by the weakest primitive used. So it makes sense to choose a specific security level and stick to it for all crypto primitives used in the system. Okay? Alright. Now, the problem with this table is that these security level calculations are based on the classical computation model we have today. And the threat here is a quantum computer. The quantum computer is expected to break crypto faster than the computers we have today. A significant effort has been put into building a quantum computer. Here you can see an example of one. However, as of today, no one has built a quantum computer that could break any crypto scheme that we use today. And there are even different opinions of whether such a computer can be built at all. Some believe that we will have one in a few years, while others believe that due to noise and errors, such a quantum computer will never work. But who knows? Time will tell. Now, an important point here is that if such a quantum computer is built, it will be able to break all the public key algorithms we use today. However, what is interesting is that for symmetric cryptography, the security level will only halve. So instead of providing 128-bit security, AES 128 will provide 64-bit security. So to get 128-bit security level, we will simply have to switch to AES 256 the day the quantum computer threat becomes real. If you're afraid of quantum computers, try to avoid asymmetric cryptography and switch to symmetric cryptography algorithms that have at least 256-bit security level. Unfortunately, most, if not all, crypto protocols that we use over the internet today rely on asymmetric cryptography. But if you have your own cloud system, with some effort, you can probably switch to symmetric crypto only. You should also realize that the confidentiality of the data you send today over the internet may be compromised in a few years if to believe to the threat of a powerful quantum computer. So we should probably reconsider whether we want to use the internet to transmit sensitive information that may cause us trouble in case it becomes public in a few years, right? Let's take a look at the concept of the adversary or threat model. Adversary or threat model is what we have to consider when discussing the security of a crypto system or security system in general. The threat model answers the question, what are the capabilities of the adversary or the attacker? What can the attacker do? How powerful is the attacker? Now, there can be very complicated threat models, but the main distinction in cryptography is between passive and active attacks. So in a passive attack or eavesdropping, the attacker can only listen to the communication. In an active attack, or the so-called man-in-the-middle attack, the attacker is in the middle of the communication, the data passes through the attacker. Hence, the attacker can not only see the data, but also replace the data, change the order of data, delay, and remove some data. Now, what do you think, which attack from these two is harder to execute? Well, by definition, active attacks are much harder to execute due to several reasons. First, they are technically more complicated. To perform an active attack, it is not enough to just measure the signal. You would need to add a device in between the parties that is able to replace data on the fly. So it becomes a single point of failure. If your device malfunctions, the communication quality gets affected. To execute a successful man-in-the-middle attack, the attack has to be pre-programmed. If we see this data, it is replaced with that data and so on. There is no time to make manual decisions about what to modify and how. Also, active attacks have a high risk of detection. If something gets modified, the parties may detect this modification by comparing what they have received over this channel by using some other channel. In contrast, for passive attacks, there is usually no means for the parties to detect that someone is listening in the conversation. Sometimes there are legal restrictions. For example, if your adversary is a law enforcement institution and the court has given permission to only eavesdrop on the communication, the authorities may not be allowed to perform active attacks to impersonate the other party. But this depends. Lately, we have also seen active attacks being authorized and executed by state agencies. If we look at this threat model in the context of public key cryptography, then we can see that we can exchange a secret key and establish a secure channel even in the presence of a passive attacker. However, the key exchange would not be secure against an active attacker, because in the active attack, an attacker could replace our public key, which we send to the other party, with the attacker's own public key. And therefore, the other party would effectively establish a secure channel with the attacker and not with us. Now, whenever we are designing a security system, we should define what is the threat model under which our system should achieve its security objectives. The point is that without a threat model, the word secure tells us nothing. If someone tells you that their product or system is secure, you have to immediately ask for the description of the threat model under which it is secure. Any product can be secure and insecure at the same time, depending on the threat model that is applied. Therefore, before performing a security audit or asking someone to audit your technological solution or system, it is a good idea to clarify the threat model of that system. If the security auditor or penetration tester misunderstands your threat model, a lot of time may be wasted by coming up with a very beautiful attacks which are actually not relevant under the actual threat model. So take this into account. Threat model can also be used to compare the security of two products to decide which provides better security. The product which is secure against more powerful attackers would then be considered to be more secure than the other. Of course, such a comparison is only useful if the threats covered are relevant in the business context and actual environment where you'll be using the product. Now, let's come back to the RSA topic. Let's look at the Infineon RSA key generation flaw, which is a good example of what can go wrong if an RSA key is not generated according to standards. Now, what is Infineon? Infineon is a huge semiconductor manufacturing company in Germany. Among other things, they are producing highly certified security chips that can perform cryptographic operations. In 2017, it was discovered that the RSA key generation algorithm implemented in these chips had a fatal flaw that allowed the factorization of the private key. And this was a huge deal, because the affected Infineon chips were used all over the world in computers, hardware security modules, and smart cards. It also became known that the flawed Infineon chip was used in more than 700,000 Estonian ID cards, and in 2017, this started the so-called Estonian ID card crisis. Because revoking the affected ID cards overnight would have blocked a lot of people from accessing electronic services, creating digital signatures, and so on. The flaw was introduced because Infineon used a self-invented algorithm for RSA private key generation. The candidate primes were not generated randomly, but were constructed using this formula. And here is what this formula consists of. M here is a 971-bit constant, which is the multiplication of the first 30 or so primes. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, up to 701. Key here is a 53-bit random number. And A here is a 255-bit random number, guaranteeing that this resulting prime P here will be a 1024-bit number. Now, why did Infineon use this strange formula to generate candidate primes? The reason is because since M here has these small prime factors, it is guaranteed that this candidate prime P will not have these prime divisors. So the probability of this candidate prime being a prime is bigger compared to the case if the prime was chosen randomly. Effectively, this hack provided a faster key generation, and this is important because these chip manufacturers compete in whose chip will provide faster crypto. Now, Infineon probably thought that nobody would ever find out that they were using this hack, as the security certification report of the chip stated that the standard algorithm is used for key generation. However, researchers from Czech Republic noticed that there were some biases in these primes and were able to fully reverse engineer this formula which you see here. Now, if you look at this formula, each prime still has 53-bit entropy in K and 255-bit entropy in the exponent A. So a naive brute force attack still requires much more than 2 to the 128 operations. However, the researchers discovered that the so-called Coppersmith attack can be applied effectively, allowing factorization of such an RSA modulus using only 2 to the 35 operations, where each operation takes 212 milliseconds on this Intel Xeon CPU. Now, even though a 35-bit security level is quite small, if we calculate, we can see that if each operation takes 200 milliseconds, then the total time required to factorize the modulus is more than 100 CPU years. But this is not a problem, because for a few thousand euros it is possible to rent out hundreds of CPUs and perform the attack in several days or maybe even a few hours. Now, the moral here is, do not invent your own crypto algorithms. The golden rule in crypto is that you should use only those algorithms which have been standardized, have been publicly exposed for years, and have received significant scrutiny over the years from the cryptanalysis community. Infineon broke this rule, paid some price, but it is not clear whether the industry got the lesson, because we haven't heard of security certification bodies banning the use of homemade crypto. By the way, there were speculations that this might have been an intentional backdoor. But this is unlikely, because there exist more simple and stealthy ways for backdooring RSA key generation. The last topic to discuss in this lecture is threshold cryptography. In threshold cryptography, several parties are required to cooperate in order to perform some cryptographic operation, such that no single party is able to perform it alone. This helps to increase security, because now an attacker has to compromise several parties to compromise the system. The most basic idea of how to implement such a scheme would be to split the private key into several parts, give each part to a separate party, requiring all parts of the private key to be joined back together to perform a cryptographic operation. Now, the problem with this approach is that there has to be someone who splits the key and joins it back together, thereby learning the entire key. Preferably, we would like to perform key generation and cryptographic operations in a distributed manner, such that the entire key is never put together. We could achieve this easily by each party having their own separate key pair. A digital signature would be only considered valid if all parties have signed the document using their key. And for encryption, the sender could encrypt each part of the plaintext with a different key, requiring all parties to decrypt their part to produce the full plaintext. This would indeed work, but here the sender or verifier would have to use several keys, which is not good, because this complicates the protocol. So instead, we would like to have a single public key representing these multiple parties that cooperate to perform private key operations. Furthermore, threshold cryptography goes beyond the all or nothing approach which we discussed so far, and supports the concept of T-N threshold, where N is the total number of parties or key shares, and T is the required threshold, meaning that cryptographic operations can only be performed if at least T out of N parties cooperate. Now, achieving such a fully flexible threshold scheme for public key cryptography, where key generation and private key operations are fully distributed, is far from trivial. So there is active ongoing research in this field that tries to come up with efficient public key threshold schemes. A nice real-world example of RSA threshold signature scheme is the Smart ID solution that is very popular here in the Baltic states. Maybe you even have it on your phone. From the user's perspective, this looks very simple. The message to be signed is received in the phone, the user enters the PIN code to unlock the private key, the message is signed, and the signature is sent to the server. Smart ID uses a clever threshold cryptography scheme where there are two parties, the server and the mobile device. The RSA private key is generated in a distributed manner such that each party has only a part of the private key. To create a signature, both parties, the server and mobile phone, have to work together. In theory, this means that if someone compromises the server or the mobile phone, they cannot forge signatures, because both parts of the private key are needed to create a signature. Let's take a closer look at the Smart ID protocol, how key generation, signing, and verification using the Smart ID solution works. This is fully optional, just in case you're interested in how it works. So here we have the server and here the mobile device. In the key generation step, both parties generate the standard 3072-bit RSA key pair using a fixed public exponent 65537. As a result, each party has their own private and public key. We call them parts. So this is part 1 and this is part 2 of the common Smart ID RSA key pair. Next, the mobile device sends its modulus to the server, and the server can then compute the common public key modulus by multiplying together the modulus of the server and modulus of the mobile device. The common public key exponent is set to 65537 because both parties used this value for their key pairs. As you see, the common modulus will be 6000 bits long, because by multiplying, the length of each modulus sums together. And that is it. The key has been generated. These two values will be the RSA public key of the Smart ID user. Let's look at the security level of this scheme. What do you think? What is the security level here? Now, for some attacker who sees only the common public key, it looks like 6000 RSA. So to break this key, the attacker would have to find the 4 prime factors from which this public key modulus is constructed. A different perspective is when we consider the server or the mobile device as an attacker. For the server to compromise the private key, the server would only need to factor this mobile device's 3000-bit modulus, and vice versa, the mobile device would have to factor this server's 3000-bit RSA modulus. So from this perspective, the scheme provides 3072-bit RSA security, which is believed to provide 128-bit security level, which is good. To sign some data, the message to be signed is sent to the mobile device, and both parties sign the message using the standard RSA signature algorithm using their parts of the private key. Then the mobile device sends its signature part to the server, and the server can then compute the composite signature. To compute the composite signature, the server first has to find two integers alpha and beta, such that alpha multiplied by n1 plus beta multiplied by n2 equals 1. These integers can be found using the extended GCD or greatest common divisor function between n1 and n2, so it is trivial to find these integers. Then the composite signature value is computed by multiplying alpha times n1 times s2 plus beta times n2 times s1 modulo the common public key modulus n. As you see, the integers alpha and beta do not depend on the signature value, so they could have already been pre-calculated in the key generation process. The verification of the composite signature is straightforward. The standard RSA signature verification algorithm is applied using the common Smart ID public key modulus n and the public exponent e. Very good. So this is the RSA threshold scheme used by the Smart ID solution. Basically, what it does is that it exploits the so-called homomorphic properties of RSA to combine parts of the signature together. One important improvement that is added into the Smart ID protocol is the protection of the mobile device's private key exponent D2 using a pin code, so that even if an attacker obtains the mobile device without knowing the correct pin code, the attacker would not be able to participate in this protocol. So how could we achieve this? The first idea that comes to mind is to simply encrypt this private exponent D2 with some pin code. The problem here is that it is very easy for the attacker to simply brute force all possible pin codes until the result of the decryption can be used to factor the public key modulus n2. Remember, if we know the private exponent and modulus, then it is easy to recover the primes p and q from the modulus n. To prevent offline pin brute force attacks, we have to do something smarter. We have to ensure that the only way the attacker can verify whether the pin guess is correct is by assigning something using the pin such that only the server can verify whether the correct pin code has been used to create the signature and block the mobile device if an incorrect pin is used several times in a row. So what the Smart ID solution does is that it splits and shares this private exponent D2 with the server such that the encryption of this private exponent is not stored on the mobile device. Here's how it works. After the mobile device generates the key, it performs secret sharing of this private exponent D2. It is done by first generating a random 3072-bit number D2 prime, which will be the first char of the private exponent, and D2 double prime, which is calculated by subtracting from the private exponent D2 the random share D2 prime. What is important to observe is that these two private exponent shares, D2 prime and D2 double prime, individually provide no information about the private exponent D2. You can actually see that these two numbers are basically both random. Only by having both of them, it is possible to add them together and recover the private exponent D2. One share of the private exponent is sent to the server, does not matter which one, and the other share is encrypted using the pin code entered by the user. And then the private exponent and the secret shares of the private exponent are deleted from the mobile device. So only this pin encrypted private exponent share is stored on the mobile device. Then, when some message has to be signed, the user enters the pin code, the share is decrypted using the entered pin code, and then the result of the decryption is used as the private exponent to create signature share S2 prime on the mobile device. The signature share is sent to the server. The server then calculates other share of the signature using the mobile device's private exponent share that was received from the device in the key generation phase. And the server computes the mobile device's signature S2 by composing these two signature shares together. If the server can verify the signature using the public key of the mobile device, then it means that the pin code was entered correctly. Otherwise, the server concludes that an incorrect pin was entered, and if this repeats 3 times in a row, the server can block the mobile device or introduce some delays. As you see, since D2 prime here is a random number, an attacker who tries to brute force the pin code has no means to determine the correct pin by observing the result of the decryption. Because for both the correct and incorrect decryption, the result of the decryption will all look random. To try out whether the pin guess was correct, the attacker has to send the produced signature share to the server, and then the server, using its private key share, will verify whether the mobile device's signature can be verified and thus the pin was entered correctly or not. Pretty neat. So this is how the pin protection measure is implemented in the Smart ID solution. In addition to this pin protection feature, there is also a clone detection feature that is implemented in the Smart ID solution. It is implemented by the server sending some unique one-time password after each transaction, and the server expects this one-time password to be returned by the mobile device at the beginning of the next transaction. The idea is that if there is a clone of a Smart ID instance running on another device, then one of the devices will use an outdated password, and this will be detected on the server side, and the Smart ID account will be blocked. Also a pretty smart feature to prevent cloning of a Smart ID instance. Now, despite the fact that the cryptographic protocol used by Smart ID is quite clever, the Smart ID solution has several serious weaknesses that are rooted in a higher protocol layer. But that is a topic for another time. Now we have covered all the topics for this lecture. Good luck with the homework.